Welcome back to part 3 of Massacre on Muriel Court. We left off last week when I introduced you to a young couple named Charlie LaJoy and Vernon Fox Jr. Both of these individuals were what you might call odd or weird, maybe even creepy. Charlie was completely obsessed with death. Vernon was suspected of being a peeping Tom and had been spotted peeping in at Joy Sims approximately 1 week before the murders. Vernon was also spotted outside on Gibbs Drive around the time the ambulance arrived at the Sims home on the night of the murders. He was waving his arms and appeared to be gesturing at someone. The things we have to keep in mind about Vernon and Charlie is that these two really only had each other. By all accounts, neither of them seemed to have any other friends. Neither of their respective sets of parents approved of their relationship, each thinking the other was a bad influence on their child. Most of their relationship was spent sneaking around and being alone together. I've heard that they spent a lot of time at the local cemetery at night.
It's mostly quiet on Muriel Court, but that wasn't the case in 1966 when Robert Sims, his wife Helen, and young daughter Joy found gagged, stabbed, and shot to death.
Safer politically to leave it alone.
It is there now. Take care of the problem.
Moronic is the word that comes to mind.
He's accusing two top officials of a cover-up.
Standing back there under the banana tree.
Surveillance video of a 1966 FSU football game may be the key to cracking the code in this case gone cold.
You do that.
And while state officials aren't releasing details regarding suspects or persons of interest, they did stress their commitment to finding the Sims killers.
Oh, I think you did it. All of a sudden you became absolutely down, totally obsessed with that.
It's a case that we would certainly like to see solved, and investigators are actively working on the case.
So before we dive too deep into Vernon and Charlie, I'd like to make sure you know all the key players in this game. And it is kind of a game, and you'll see why as I continue to tell you this story. Some of these names you've heard before, some are new, but pay attention because you'll need to remember who these people are when I talk about them later. First up, we have former state attorney Willie Meggs. The Sims case spanned Meggs' career in law enforcement. Meggs has spent his entire life in Tallahassee. He began his career in law enforcement, taking undergraduate classes at Florida State while working full-time. He graduated from Florida State's College of Law in 1976 and joined the state attorney's office as an assistant prosecutor under then state attorney Harry Morrison. But on the night in 1966, when the Sims were murdered, a young Tallahassee police officer, Willie Meggs, was actually at the scene of the Sims murder to direct traffic. Meggs retired from the state attorney's office in 2016 after serving 8 terms as state attorney for the 2nd Judicial Circuit of Florida. Next, we have Larry Campbell, and you've heard his name before. Campbell was the first to arrive at the Sims scene and lead detective on the case at just 24 years old. Before his death in 2014, Campbell had done 1 tour as a United States Marine and over 50 years in law enforcement in Tallahassee. In 1961, during his senior year at Florida State University, he took a job as a patrol deputy at the sheriff's office to cover college costs. 6 years later, he joined the Sheriff's Bureau, a forerunner of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or FDLE, and in 1970, he began working as a special agent for the FDLE in Jacksonville. He joined the sheriff's office in 1981, taking a job as director of operations overseeing the SWAT team. He served as undersheriff for 15 years before winning his first term as sheriff in 1996. He was re-elected without opposition for the next 2 election cycles, but drew opponents in 2008 and 2012 when he was last elected. Sheriff Campbell truly dedicated his life to protecting and serving Florida families. Then Governor Rick Scott said in a written release when Campbell died. He was also deeply passionate about encouraging his fellow law enforcement officers to join him in volunteering to better the Leon County community. Larry Campbell caused quite a stir when he announced that he knew who the killers were in the Sims case. Yes, killers, plural, but just didn't have the evidence to prove it in court, so he refused to name names. He also claimed that it was a sex crime and that Joy Sims was indeed the main target. Next up, we have Jeremy Mutz. He was a prosecutor in Leon County from 2003 to 2016 when he was abruptly fired by State Attorney Willie Meggs, supposedly for digging into the Sims murder. According to the Tallahassee Democrat article titled "Prosecutor Fired Over Sims Murder Investigation," written by Carl Edders in 2016, former Assistant State Attorney Jeremy Mutz said he was fired because of ego and politics connected to his continued investigation of the Sims triple murder case. Mutz also claimed that political influence from Leon County Sheriff at the time, Mike Wood, may have led to his termination, just as new information surfaced that Mutz believed could have led to an arrest or elimination of potential suspects in the long cold case. In January of 2016, a task force was formed to reopen and look into the Sims case. At their first meeting, it was established that the sheriff at the time, Mike Wood, Leon County Sheriff's Office, would take the lead on the investigation, but Jeremy Mutz was invited to be part of the task force. That was probably one of the happiest days of my life because I felt like now at least we would have a chance of doing something with that case where there would be justice done for the family, he said. I wanted to see something happen because the case was so awful, it bothered me a lot. In the initial meeting, Mutz said Wood indicated several times that there was, quote, no political rush to initiate a full-scale probe into the murders. Wood was running for Leon County Sheriff again at that time. He would later say that his comment was misconstrued. It was made to emphasize that there would be no rush to conclude the case for expediency's sake or political gain. Jeremy Mutz developed a timeline with fresh witness statements and said he got the green light from Meggs to investigate. Meggs, however, said that Mutz was using his access to information about the case for a book he was working on about the murders, an allegation that Jeremy Mutz denies. Meggs also said Mutz was inappropriately contacting FDLE and writing to witnesses independently and wanted to go public with intimate details of the ongoing criminal investigation. Mutz wrote letters to potential witnesses and their families and the FDLE outlining his findings, some of which were new. He outlined the political motivations in a July 14th FDLE memo. I know this memo will not please Sheriff Wood or others, he wrote. I am willing to accept the consequences, including the end of my career. And that's exactly what happened, at least in Tallahassee. Jeremy Mutz is now practicing criminal defense and family law at his own practice in Chipley, Florida. But leaving the state attorney's office did not stop Jeremy Mutz from pursuing answers in the Sims case. I'll be referring to Jeremy a lot in this podcast, as he is an expert of sorts on the Sims case. And later on, hopefully we'll hear from him and see what he has to say now. Next up, we have Sheriff Mike Wood, or I should say former Sheriff Mike Wood. Wood was appointed as the Sheriff of Leon County by Florida Governor Rick Scott when Larry Campbell passed away in 2014. He became a deputy in March of 1983. Wood started as a patrol deputy and marched up the ranks, holding nearly every position in the office. He joined the SWAT team, where he worked directly with Larry Campbell, and eventually commander of the SWAT and hostage team. In 2006, he was promoted to major, joining Campbell's command staff, and was responsible for all law enforcement operations. He was the lead investigator on the gut-wrenching December 2007 killing of Crawfordville nurse Cheryl Dunlap by serial killer Gary Michael Hilton. Now, Wood counts that as the most stressful investigation of his career. In 2009, he was assigned as director of the Leon County Jail. Wood considers himself one of the last old-school deputies, quote, the youngest of the old guys. He was a sheriff when Jeremy Mutz was fired. State Attorney Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell is the current state attorney for the 2nd Judicial Circuit of Florida. He was elected in 2016 and was re-elected without opposition in 2020. He is also the son of Larry Campbell. Sheriff Walter McNeil, current sheriff of the Leon County Sheriff's Office. Before being elected as sheriff, he spent 10 years as the chief of police at the Tallahassee Police Department. Next up, we have Vernon Britton Fox Sr. He was a professor of criminology at Florida State University from 1952 to 1986. He was professor emeritus beginning in 1986 and chairman of the Department of Criminology from 1952 to 1971. Before taking his position at FSU, Fox Sr. was a caseworker and athletic director at the Star Commonwealth for Boys in Albion, Michigan from 1941 to 1942. He was then head psychologist at the State Prison Southern Michigan in Jackson from 1942 to 1946 and deputy warden from 1949 to 1952. He was then a psychologist at Cassidy Lake Technical School, Michigan Department of Corrections from 1946 to 1949. Fox Sr. wrote several college textbooks, including Introduction to Criminology, Correctional Institutions, and Introduction to Corrections. Fox Sr. was a well-known and highly respected man in Tallahassee. Many of the lawmen and attorney in the area had actually been his students when they were at school at FSU, including Larry Campbell. Side note, according to a source, who will be revealed later in the series, Larry Campbell and Vernon Fox Sr. did not like each other. Larry Campbell resented the way Dr. Fox treated him as an FSU student, and Dr. Fox disliked Larry and believed he had below-average intelligence for a college student. Dr. Fox apparently had a low opinion of law enforcement in general. The next important person to this case was Henry Cabbage. Cabbage was a former newspaper reporter who spent 26 years as a public information director for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. He wrote a history column in the 1990s for the defunct weekly newspaper, The Tallahassean. Cabbage also spent several years working on a book about the Sims murder. The book was stymied by the refusal of the law enforcement agencies to release their files. They claimed it was an ongoing investigation. In 2001, Cabbage lost a lawsuit to force the release of the records, but a year later, then Leon County Sheriff Larry Campbell turned over more than 2,000 pages of records that they had since 1987. During a talk to the Tallahassee Historical Society in 2015, Cabbage publicly named Vernon Fox Jr. and Charlie LaJoie as the main suspects in the case. Now, their names were already in public records associated with the case, but it was a very bold move on Henry Cabbage's part. Until his death in 2020, I would say that Henry Cabbage was probably the foremost civilian expert on this case. Next, we have Kyle Jones. In 2018, Kyle Jones, then a film student at FSU, made an hour-long documentary titled 641 Muriel Court. Now, we spoke at length with Kyle in 2019 when Paradise After Dark first covered the Sims case. The research from the film came mostly from Henry Cabbage's information and documents. This documentary features interviews with all the key players, including Vernon Fox Jr. Also involved in the film were FSU graduate student Elijah Howard, graduate Vienna Kidd, and senior Michael Walsh. I highly recommend you watch this documentary if you're interested. There will be a link in the show notes. Now, back to the Sims murder investigation. While investigators were zeroing in on C.A. Roberts, they were also looking at Charlie LaJoie and Vernon Fox Jr. Both were interviewed by police within the first few days of the murder. Neither of them could keep their stories straight from the beginning. Both agreed that they had went to the Perry Highway Drive-In movies that night. But from then on, it all falls apart. Charlie says she picked Vernon up at a park around 7 p.m. They went to the movies and saw 2 movies, which would have kept them there until about 10:45 p.m., too late to have committed the murders. In the same statement, she changed her story and said they left the movies early. The ticket taker at the drive-in remembers seeing the couple leave early. They thought about stopping for a Coke, but they were low on gas, so they decided against it. They went directly home. Charlie dropped Vernon off at the corner of Gibbs and Stiles Street in the neighborhood. Both said that there was a car coming down the street near where Charlie dropped Vernon off. Both said it had bright headlights. Vernon says he walked home and arrived a little after 11 p.m., made himself a sandwich, and went to his room to watch a Saturday night movie and then went to bed. Now, officers noted that the movie he told investigators he was watching that night was actually not on TV that night. Charlie claims she got home at 10:55 p.m. She took her birth control pill at 11:05 p.m. She wrote this in her journal she kept at the time. There's also some missing time here. If they went to the movies at 7 p.m., and even if they stayed for the entire first movie, they would have been out of there by 9 or 9:30. But Vernon says he got home at 11 p.m. Investigators were so suspicious about this young couple that they actually bugged Charlie's car. Vernon didn't have a car at the time. And they recorded as Charlie and Vernon sat parked, laughing at investigators as they drained the pond near the Sims home, looking for the murder weapon. Why would anybody be laughing at this? But the investigators never seemed to quite have enough evidence to charge Charlie and or Vernon. Now, as we mentioned, Vernon Fox Sr., the founder of the criminology department at FSU, had many friends in high places. At one point, State Attorney Bill Hopkins called law enforcement and told them he's getting phone calls from people in higher places, either charge Vernon Fox Jr. or lay off. I don't think it would be too far off the mark here by saying that they may have had some political influence in the decision to charge or not charge. Larry Campbell even once said, "I know who did it, but I couldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole." Corruption, bribery, and the like have been a way of life in the Tallahassee government for as long as anyone can remember. Most recently, John J.T. Burnett, a wealthy entrepreneur, developer, and hotelier, was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and a $1.25 million fine for public corruption charges for his role in a long-running City Hall bribery ring involving former City Commissioner Scott Maddox and his accomplice and girlfriend Paige Carter Smith. Scott Maddox was indicted on December 12, 2018 on 44 charges, including racketeering, bribery, extortion, bank fraud, and wire fraud, in an FBI investigation into corruption that played a key role in Democrat Andrew Gillum's campaign for Florida governor. In September of 2021, Maddox was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Andrew Gillum, I'm sure you've heard that name. He was a Tallahassee City Commissioner from 2003 to 2014, first elected at age 23. He then went on to serve as the 126th Mayor of Tallahassee from 2014 to 2018. In 2018, Gillum was a nominee for the Florida Democratic Party to be governor of Florida, but he was beat by Ron DeSantis. Sounds like a stand-up guy, right? Well, you'd be wrong. In March of 2020, the Tallahassee Democrat reported that Gillum was one of 3 men, one of whom was experiencing a drug overdose, who were found with plastic baggies of suspected crystal meth in a hotel room in Miami Beach. However, no arrests were made. The person who overdosed has been reported by numerous outlets as a gay male escort. Just so we are clear, there's nothing wrong with being gay, but prostitution is still illegal in the state of Florida. On June 22nd of 2002, Gillum was indicted by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Florida on 21 felony counts, including wire fraud, conspiracy, and making false statements for allegedly diverting money raised during the campaign to a company controlled by Sharon Letman Hicks, one of his top advisors in his campaign, who then used the money to pay Gillum. Now, dating back to the Sims murder, there is a possibility that a cover-up was in the works in this case. In 2012, the now defunct publication Tallahassee O received a letter from one of its readers. Just a little background. Deputy Samuel Bruce retired from the Leon County Sheriff's Office in 1998 and again in 2008. Yes, twice. He later came back part-time in 2009 and appears to be still working with the department. Keep in mind, this is an anonymous letter, not facts. Some of the dates are wrong, and some of it might not make sense to you right now, as I haven't told you the whole story yet. And I've actually omitted a couple sentences that make no sense, are not based on any facts or plausible theories, and would only serve to confuse. The letter writer wrote, "What I have you may want to look at that may indicate the continuing cover-up of another murder case. A triple murder case, the Sims triple murder, circa 1960s. A relative of Sam Bruce, Patricia Sunday, and former school board member, was a childhood friend of a murder suspect in the Sims murder case. A few years ago, after Bruce had retired from LCSO, Sunday went to Bruce with info regarding a conversation she had had with the murder suspect years ago that was relevant to the case. A few years ago, an author, Henry Cabbage, was doing a supposed book on the Sims triple murder and sued LCSO for a circa 1970s interview video. The video was a 4-hour interview of the suspect, Charlie LaJoy, Campbell, and Detective Greco. It is revealing, graphic, and eye-opening. Miss LaJoy tells what happened that night at the Sims house under the guise of a dream. In the video, Miss LaJoy mentions her friend, Patricia Sunday, and that is how the author came to contact Patricia Sunday and gave Miss Sunday a copy of the video investigation. Sunday was able to piece together things that LaJoy had told her through the years that would perhaps give probable cause for 2 arrests in the Sims murder case. Sunday went to her nephew, Bruce, thinking Bruce would take this to Campbell and arrests would be made. Instead, this may be about the time Bruce went back to work for LCSO and Sunday disappeared. I think she may have gotten a job with the state out of town. I believe LaJoy was even a bridesmaid in Sunday's first wedding. So they were good friends, and I believe Sunday's info may have been enough to reopen the case. The case was never reopened, even though Sunday had the info. Did Bruce receive a job from LCSO to keep him quiet? Did they find a job for Sunday out of town to keep her quiet? I believe arrests should have been made long ago in the Sims murder. The second subject was the boyfriend of LaJoy and the son of a famous criminology professor at FSU. The criminology professor at FSU the same time Campbell was there. The professor lived in a home behind the Sims. The son was about to be arrested for allegedly molesting the youngest Sims girl. He was also dismissed from the military for schizophrenia and on Thorazine. The pattern is the same years ago as today. If a murder is committed in Leon County and a well-known family is involved as suspects, the suspects get a pass from Willie Meggs and Larry Campbell. They take it upon themselves to cover up. Sims, Hart, Mays, the same pattern continues that dangerous suspects are allowed to not even be investigated, much less arrested and brought to trial. P.S. Campbell was the first deputy on the scene of the Sims murder in the 1960s. Campbell had the chance to arrest the perps in the 1970s when the interview he had with one of the suspects revealed probable cause. Campbell again in 2009 had more evidence but still covers this up, and it appears rehires the retired LCSO employee who had some evidence. Is Campbell rehiring a retired LCSO employee to suppress evidence in a crime he has long been covering up? Okay, so that was the anonymous letter sent to the publication Tallahassee O in 2012. And that was a direct quote. Those weren't my words. In July of 2016, Patricia Sunday, a Leon County school superintendent candidate, said she knew who killed the family. Sunday says she was 19 years old when Charlie confided in her the gruesome details about the murder of the Sims family. She detailed everything that happened in the murders. I said, "How could you know this? How could you possibly know this?" To which she backed off and said, "I can't talk about it. I must have dreamed it." Sunday said she's now speaking out because she believes that Jeremy Mutz, the assistant Leon County state attorney, was fired for pushing too hard while investigating the Sims murder case. Patricia Sunday claims she shared this information with the sheriff's office 30 years ago. Then Leon County Sheriff Mike Wood is responding. I have no intention of commenting on a conversation that she said she had with Larry Campbell 30 years ago. I welcome her to come to the sheriff's office if she has information of substance in the Sims case. But Patricia Sunday didn't plan on doing that. I've been there several times, she said, and I'm done. I reached out to Patricia Sunday to invite her to speak to me for this podcast. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, as she asked me for $5,000 for an interview. It's our policy here at Palmahawk Media that we don't pay for interviews. But Patricia Sunday did email me a great deal of information. But before I get into what she told me, you need to know one thing, which will much further be elaborated on in the future of this series. In 1987, Larry Campbell had an almost confession to this case handed to him on a golden platter, figuratively, and he blew it so badly, it seemed almost as if he did it on purpose. So here is a direct quote from an email Patricia Sunday sent to me on August 8th of 2022. I am going to share a lot here for free, and I do this with the knowledge that I am a Christian, and I will have to answer to God for what I say. The Bible says that every secret, hidden sin will be revealed before the second coming, in the day of the unveiling. I believe we are there, okay? So if you are not a Christian, you will not understand the point of view I am coming from. We all sin, yes, even me, but God forgives if we ask. It is those that do not humbly ask God for forgiveness that want to get out of it through other earthly means. Charlie and I were friends since we were 5 years old. Yes, she told me in person the next day when I went over to visit her. I had heard the news and asked her, did she hear about it? She said, yes, I was there that night. She walked me through the scene that left me in shock. Then she turned her back to me, checking her pill schedule and downing a birth control pill. Then she blew it off and said it was like a dream, so maybe she had just dreamed it. I was confused and admittedly stupid and in too much shock to know what to do with what I had just heard. I was 19 too and just married. She was my maid of honor in my wedding 6 weeks before the murders. I have plenty of pictures of us in elementary school, my wedding, and a letter she wrote to me when I was in Montana with my second husband. She spoke my name on the tape interview, but no one ever interviewed me. No one arrested her, so I thought she was just crazy like everybody else did. When Jeremy Mutz began sifting through this, and it came back up, I phoned Charlie where she was living in Jacksonville. I believe in the house she got from the divorce from Vernon. I told her that it was getting stirred up again. I told her to see what she would say. She got so scared that is when the 1987 interview tape was done. Campbell sent a deputy to pick her up, paid for her trip, and drove her back at taxpayers' expense. I knew nothing about this until the 1987 tape was put in my hands by Henry Cabbage when he called me to talk about the case. I told everything to Larry Campbell and my nephew. Campbell said the other daughters wanted the family to rest in peace and did not want the notoriety brought back up. But until this is solved, it will never rest. Inquiring minds want to know. He showed me letters they had written him stating that. Campbell and Bruce were the only law officers I spoke to about this. My nephew does not speak to me to this day. He was supposed to be my handler to keep me quiet. He is embarrassed by me and my big mouth. He was running in some pretty big circles with Montford, Campbell, Meggs, and longtime tax collector Doris Malloy. Another thing, I had a copy of the tape and had made extensive notes, and I kept them under my bed. They were stolen shortly after my last trip to see Campbell and an attempted bugging of Charlie. A lady officer was assigned for this, and she and my nephew were the only two that knew the layout of the trailer I lived in. Now you have to remember, too, that Campbell, Meggs, and Bruce were all good Christians, too, right? Maybe they have all asked for forgiveness for their hand in this. I have questions for you. Why is Larry Campbell's son now state attorney? Promises, bribes, and undercover cops. They put him in position to stop any arrests. What happens if she finally openly confesses and it is up to Jack Campbell to pursue the case? They would have to change venue. We would have to wonder who is at the head of this pyramid. Now that I can't answer for sure, but I have an uneducated guess. I have been a thorn in the side of the politics in this town for a long time. Everyone gets promoted for keeping their mouth shut, but blackballed if you don't. So those are some pretty serious accusations made. Was there a cover-up? We will discuss that more down the road. By 1969, just 3 years later, the case was ice cold. Then Leon County Sheriff William Joyce told a reporter for the Panama City News-Herald that the crime would never be solved unless the perpetrators confessed. Why would they give up so easily and so quickly? That's the question I will leave you with this week. Join me next week for episode 4 of Massacre on Muriel Court. Massacre on Muriel Court is researched, written, and produced by me, Lauren Samples. If you'd like to support the show, please consider joining our Palmahawk Media Patreon page at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media. On Patreon, you'll receive early and ad-free episodes of this show and our sister show, Paradise After Dark, along with exclusive content for both shows. Thanks for listening.